Afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to discuss very important topic of your semester 2 exam, the government budget, okay, prepared by the Commerce Department. And this topic is very important for you in your whole life. Why? You will make out once we'll start the session. So in this chapter, what you are supposed to study? These are the following topic you are supposed to study. The government budget, meaning types of government budget, and there we'll focus on union budget, state budget, and their components. Components of government budget, revenue and capital, we'll discuss it in detail. Then thereafter we are going to discuss the concept of deficit budget, revenue deficit, fiscal deficit and primary deficit. We'll discuss those part also, along with the implications and then deficit meaning. So very, very important to mark all these important points which is as per your council. So it's a reduced syllabus I am talking about. So let's see how this budget works, how it goes, okay? How it goes. It goes this way, children. Budget, if you look at here, this part, children, when you look at this part, okay, when you look at this part, budget is an annual statement, okay? It's an annual statement of annual financial year, where we talk about the expenditures, where we talk about the revenue receipts. And who prepared this budget? The Finance Ministry, Department of Economic Affairs. They are contributing to prepare this budget. And this budget is the final approval. The approval of this budget is given under the Article 117. Section 1 and Section 3. According to that, it is presenting to the President before they're presenting to the Lok Sabha. Thereafter, it moving to the Article 200. This Constitution, this is, I'm going to give you just overview, which is actually not required for your council, just the information. So, as per the articles, the Constitution articles, budget preparation is done in the Article 112 to 117. Money bill, then Finance Minister will publish this budget every year on the first day of Feb in the Lok Sabha. Thereafter it moves to the Rajya Sabha. Then we'll move on to the final approval, and so many things will take place. So budget play very important role for any country, any nation. Then what do you mean by, I have given the overview, what do you mean by a government budget? And I'm sure you would agree with this. Government budget, it's not a new concept in our life. Budgetary process is there in our day-to-day life also. When you received your money, your pocket money from your parents, you will divide it into a different section, different heads. I mean, you will distribute as per the needs. This much of money I will use for my books, this much of money I will use for my stationery, this much of money I will use for my luxury or food items, this much of money I will use for my transportation, for gifts or some other thing. You will decide. Similarly, government will decide their expenses well in advance, and thereafter they will decide on which source, through which source they will collect this much of fund. So they are moving different way. in our life, what we have done? First, the earning, and then thereafter we will decide the expenses. But in country's budget, it's a bit different. First, they are deciding the expenses, and then thereafter they will decide the revenue, the receipts, the collection of money. So that's the only difference in our practical life or in government. So this budget, it's not a new word, new term. The word budget has been borrowed from the English word budgetti, which traces its origin from the French word budgetti. Word budgetti has arrived from the word bague, which means leather bag. What does it mean? It means a leather bag, which means a purse, a kind of purse. Over here, we are emphasizing on the purse. In purse, what we do? We keep certain money and we are utilizing that money for our satisfaction, for our commodities, for our services. So people are using budget for this purpose. Let's talk about the meaning of budget. Already highlighted the key points. It is defined as financial statement showing expected receipts and expenditure of the government during the financial year, during a period of a financial year. So it's a financial statement which shows two things. One, expected receipts and expected expenditure in the year, which we also called as financial year. So expected one, because we are preparing the budget for the future, not the current one, future one, upcoming, which will the budget always implement from the day April 1. But it is published, it is announced in month of Feb. 1st of Feb. Recently, the speech of Nirmala Sitharaman on 1st Feb 2022 was the longest speech in the budget history. So she talked about so many things. I will not talk about that key points, but budget talks about the receipts and the expenditures of a country in a financial year, in an upcoming year. So they emphasize on certain points. First, the statement of government budget emphasizes on the expected revenue and the proposed expenditures of the government. Second, they poses periodicity, which generally a 1 year. It's not for more than 1 year. It's only for a year. Third, it has sanction by the public authority. Each and every member of Lok Sabha would agree. They'll give their agreement. Okay, we are agreed. We are supporting. If any query, any question they have, they will put forward to the finance minister, and finance minister would answer to their questions. And then it's finalized. Fourth, expenditure and source of finance are planned in accordance with the objective of. So the finance minister will speak about the detail on which head they are going to expand, they're making their expenditures, from which source they will collect money, each and everything they will discuss, each and everything they will announce in their speech, they will talk about it. Everything they will talk in the parliament. Then moving to the needs. Why do you need the budget? What are the purpose? There are some reason. In family also we need money, we need finance for some reason. Let's talk about our family before we are moving to the practical. First, we need money for our food, our transportation, our clothes, education, electricity bill. Okay, then your grocery ship bill, your communication bill, and so many things are needed. Similarly, the budget is needed for the country to make the economic stable, economic growth, betterment. In economic growth means human capital formation, infrastructure development, so many things are required. And that's why it is needed. So let's talk about one by one. So whatever you will collect from the people, from the society, you will redistribute them. You will redistribute to the society. Redistribution of income and wealth, that's an important point. The budget of the government shows its comprehensive exercise on taxation and subsidies. The government use fiscal instrument like taxation and subsidies to improve the distribution of income, wealth in the economy. Equitable distribution of income and wealth is a sign of social justice, which is a principal object of welfare state like India. We are distributing whatever we have collected through the taxation. Taxation means there are two types of taxes, direct and indirect, and then these taxes will redistribute to the society in other form, maybe in the form of subsidies, maybe in the form of salaries, wages, anything, or for development. So government will return that money, but not directly. Indirectly they are returning with the help of social justice or social welfare. Second point, planned approach to the government activities. So government activities have increased tremendously, which needs mobilization of large sources to meet increased requirement of the government expenditure. There has to be defined planning for the estimated revenue and proposed expenditure for the proper conduct of the government activities. So now we are talking about the government activities. What is government activities? Government activities are to run the government, to maintain the law and order, to develop the infrastructure, to connect the societies, to connect the state to state, connect the cities to cities through different channels, railway, roadways, airways, electrified them, water supply, distribution of food grains, education, medical facilities, so many activities they have to do. So these are supposed to be planned one. It's not supposed to be unplanned. It's supposed to be planned one. Okay, so they are doing certain activities which is planned. Third, economic stability. Yes, economic stability needs to be maintained. And I'm sure you are very much comfortable with the trade cycle. Each and every economy is going through with that trade cycle, or we generally call it a business cycle. Sometimes there is a recession, sometimes there is inflation, deflation, recovery, boom period, so many things. So government has to maintain that trade cycle for the betterment of society. If there is inflation, government impose taxes on general public so that they will demand less. If there is deflation, then government will infuse the money in the circulation, or they will reduce the taxes. They grant the subsidies so that they will maintain the economic stability. Fourth point, allocation of resources. Through the budgetary policy, the government of a country allocate resources in a manner so that there is a balance between goals of profit maximization and social welfare. Production of goods that are injurious to health is discouraged through heavy taxation on the other hand, of social use goods is encouraged through subsidies. So that is encouragement. Heavy taxes, which is actually not required, which is injurious to health, the product like tobacco, alcohol, and there are drugs, there are certain drugs which is injurious to health, they put more taxes on it so that no one will buy, and give more subsidies on those products which is required for the society, for the betterment of society. We give them more. So it's an allocation of resources. Fifth, public accountability. Whatever they are deciding, they are accountable for single paisa. They are returning each and every single paisa, single pie to the people. And people has the right to question to the government. So they are accountable for each and everything. So this exercise, when they are announcing the result, when they publishing that result, budget in the parliament, they are explaining each and everything systematically to the Lok Sabha members. So if they have any questions, if they have any doubt, they'll question. So the government budget has the purpose of public accountability of fund. Budget proposals are discussed in the parliament, and the parliament exercise control over the government budget through different committees like public accounts, an estimate committee, and committee on the public undertaking. Everything will be taken care. Then we have instrument of economic policy. The government budget is not only a statement of estimating receipts and expenditures, but it is a powerful instrument to be used as the economic policies of the government. It is helpful in the removal of inequalities, economic instability, everything. So they have to maintain the economic policies. Then index of government functioning. It is going to reflect the functioning. This budget reflects the functioning of our government, current government, whether they have achieved certain goals which they have planned in the last budget, how much they have achieved, how much is left, everything, every detail they will talk. If any malpractices, any corruption take place in between, that is also reflect their performance. So it is maintained. So proper planning regarding taxes, subsidies shows the efficiency of the government, and duration of the corrections, other type of malpractices, everything will be recorded in the budget. So these are the following needs. These are the following needs, and there are many more needs you can add on with the budget. Okay. So now we are moving to the next point, which is types of budget. So if you look at the types of budget in your book, there are several types of budgets, 6-7 types budget. Planned budget, supplementary budget, zero-based budget, vote on account budget, union budget, state budget. Now, for you, there is a question, sir, in the scope of syllabus, only union budget and state budget is mentioned. Why to study this? It's not from this year, it's mentioned from last so many years, 2-3 years back also, the scope of syllabus showing only union budget and state budget. But we keep on teaching other type of budget as well. Why? Because they ask. They consider this as a scope. So I will give you just a small overview on the other type of budget. So first one, union budget. Union budget is prepared under the Article 112. So it is prepared by the central government of the country as a whole. This budget, earlier this budget was presented in two parts, railway budget and main budget. But now, after 2017, this budget becomes one, union budget only. And which was presented, which is presented by finance minister of our country, whomsoever is a finance minister. So Nirmala Sitharaman was the second lady finance, second finance minister, second lady finance minister in our country. First one was Indira Gandhi, second was Nirmala Sitharaman. State budget. State budget comes in Article 202 and it is prepared or repaired by the state government, such as one budget of Punjab government, UP government, Assam government. It is prepared by the chief minister or state finance minister, but it is presented by the chief minister of the state in the member or legislative assembly. Okay. Thereafter we have planned budget. Planned budget is a kind of document which shows projects, programs, schemes, including the central plans, non-plans, everything. This will show the planned receipts and expenditure of a country. So that's why we call it a planned budget. Next, very important, vote and account budget. This comes in Article 116 of Constitution. The budget can be split up during the year. The reason may be political in nature. The existing government may or may not be continued for the whole year. And that's why we are presenting vote and account. This is very for short period from Feb to month of March. Okay, so 2-3 months only. So Feb and March, and thereafter maybe the government will change. Maybe the political leader who has presented in month of Feb, they will not continue as a finance minister, and their government will not continue after March. Then it will consider as a lame duck budget also. This budget is also called as a lame duck budget. So on account of that fact, election are due, then government prepared a lame duck budget. This is called vote and account budget. Very important, children. This budget is very important and you should remember these names. Okay, so vote and account budget for 2 months, only for 2 months. Or maybe the government will change in September. So April, May, June, July, August, September, where again they have to publish new budget. So that's for 5 months, or for 3 months, for 2 months, for short period. Okay. Then we have zero-based budget. This budget, the government of India commenced zero-based budget in 1987 and 88. It is particularly technique for the preparation of the budget. It involves a fresh evaluations of every item of expenditure on the government. Whatever we are planning to do the expenses, whatever expenses we have planned this year, each and every detail we have to give to the member of Lok Sabha. Single penny record we have to show. If they feel any doubt or any confusion, they will ask you. They have the right to ask you, and that's why we call it a zero-based budget. Then supplementary budget. Supplementary budget is prepared during particular situations when there is a natural calamity, war situation, or something like curfew, something happen all of a sudden. During emergency, you can consider emergency time. So during that particular period of time, government preparing the supplementary budget for it. Like Kerala flood, okay? Like some tsunamis affected the coastal region. For that particular purpose, we are preparing a supplementary budget. All of a sudden, some war happens with neighboring country. That particular point of time, you need a budget for particular purpose, for some purpose. So you are preparing supplementary budget for that. And then this budget is also presenting in the parliament. Okay. Then next topic we have components of budget. What are the components of budget? So budget is divided into two parts. One, a revenue budget, and second one is a capital budget. So one by one we will discuss it. First one, let's talk about the structure of government budget. Components of government budget and the structure of the government budget are the same. Please do not confuse. Revenue budget. Now what is revenue budget? Revenue budget comprises revenue receipts and expenditure met from such revenue. And it has two parts. Revenue receipts, which includes all types of taxes and non-tax revenue. Second, revenue expenditures includes all types of planned and non-planned expenditures of the government. Revenue account cover those items which are recurring in nature and non-redeemable. So it includes those parts, and they create no liability or neither no sale of assets. Okay, so they are in this budget, no liability occurs and no reduction in assets, because in this budget we are making some expenses on planned and unplanned which never create any assets for us, and neither they are not reducing any liability for us. Revenue receipts, which are collected by the tax sources and non-tax sources. So we'll discuss that part. Now the second part of this budget is a capital budget, which comprises of two things: capital receipts and capital expenditure of the government. Capital receipts are those receipts of the government which create liability, which means you are borrowing money, or maybe they will reduce the financial assets of the government or the country. So example, foreign loans, you maybe are taking loan from the RBI, general public, you are taking loan from the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, or other economies, or some other people. You are borrowing money. That means you are increasing your liability. And that liability, when you create liability, it's considered to be the capital receipts for us. And sometimes we are selling our assets also. So when you sell some assets and you are earning something, you are getting something in return, and that return is considered to be the capital receipts in budget. Second part of this budget is capital expenditure. Capital expenditure refers to those expenditure of the government which leads to the creation of physical or financial assets or reduction in the financial liabilities. For example, expenditure on building and other constructions of purchasing machineries, investment in shares, etc. So your construction road, that is considered to be the capital expenditure. Constructions of road, purchasing Rafale will come in the revenue expenditure. Buying some bus for transportation help, adding new trains for the railway, that is considered to be the railway capital expenditures, and it is adding to some liabilities. Not adding, reducing some liabilities and adding some assets to us. So let's talk about this in detail. So there are two components of government revenue budget: revenue receipts. Now very important definition, children. I will mark. Revenue receipts refers to those receipts which neither create any liability or nor causes any reduction in the assets of the government. So they're regular, recurring in nature, and government receives them its normal course of activity. So neither create any liability and nor reduction in any assets of the government. So no reduction in the assets, neither create any liability for us. It's called revenue receipts. And this work this way. Revenue receipts neither create any liabilities and nor reduce any assets to us. It's called revenue receipts. So what are the sources? Revenue receipts of the government are generally classified under two heads. One, tax revenue, and second one is tax revenue is divided into direct tax. We have already discussed in the previous chapter direct taxes and indirect taxes. So I'm not going to repeat these. So direct taxes, which is directly collected, and whomsoever it is imposed, the same person will pay, same individual will pay to the government in the form of different forms: capital gain tax, wealth tax, interest, so many tax, etc. Indirect tax, this burden is shifted to other person, and it is on the property of an individual. Company is also paying indirect taxes in the form of sale tax, service tax, VAT, entertainment, custom duties. So it likes this: direct tax, ultimate burden of the tax, responsibility to pay tax. For example, these are the responsibility. When you earn income, you are responsible to pay tax, and you also have the burden. Indirect taxes, ultimate burden of the tax purchaser, those who are purchasing goods. Responsibility to pay taxes is the shopkeeper, like VAT. When you buy stuff, the shopkeeper is responsible for tax payment, but he is collected from you. They are collected from you as a customer. So customer are paying taxes on behalf of the seller or the shopkeeper. That's called indirect taxes. There are some non-tax revenue. In the previous lecture, we have not explained this part. So non-tax revenue, tax part we have completed in the previous lecture. So what is non-tax revenue, which is other than the tax receipts? So non-tax revenue refers to those receipts of the government from all sources other than the tax receipts. First, interest. Now central government receive interest on loan which they have given to the state government, union territories, private enterprises, or to the general public. Now the question is, sir, who will come in the general public? General public means anyone wants to answer? What do you mean by general public here? Anyone? Akanshit, Arav, what do you mean by general public here? Any one of you? Shri Priya, Kash, yes, Arav, go ahead. Shri Priya, Kash.
The public who are eligible to vote to be an initiative.
Okay.
Like to be an initiative.
And
To be the person who can vote. To be a classifier of like the tax slabs, like 5 lakh slabs, like non-taxing slabs. So that's how general public.
Okay. Anyone wants to add anything? Shri Priya, Kashvi, Navya, Kashish, anyone wants to add anything? Yes, Saransh and Shri. Okay. Okay, so anyone in the public, they are also borrowing money. So they are paying taxes. So that will be the receipts. That will be the, yes, go ahead. Shreyans, you want to add anything?
No, I'm
Okay, fine. Okay, so these are interest. Then fees. Fee refers to the charge imposed by the government to cover the cost of recurring services provided by it. Court fees, registration fees, import fees, license fees. Okay, driving license means arms and ammunition fees. Okay, so that's a license fees. They are paying commercial. So they are supposed to pay certain amount to the government as a fee. So when you go for the passport, you are paying certain amount of fees. So that will be the income. When you apply for a government job, you have to pay certain amount as a fee for railways, for other jobs. So that is also considered to be the fee. So they're collecting money from you. So that is considered to be the non-tax revenue. Fee and penalties, fine and penalties. It refers to the payment which is imposed on lawbreaker, fine for jumping light over non-payment of taxes. The latter is imposed by the generated revenue. So that is penalties. When you penalize for jumping any light or you are breaking any rule and regulations, then you will be fined for it. And then fine, when you make payment of your electricity bill lately, then you will be fined for it. And if you travel in a wrong bogie, I mean, suppose you have a sleeper class ticket and you are traveling in AC, then you have to pay fine. You will be penalized for it. So that will be the government income. It's a non-tax revenue. There are few more incomes. Few more gifts and grants. The government receives gifts and grants from the foreign government, international organizations, sometimes individuals, companies. Money to the government receives during a national crisis such as war, flood, like pandemic time. Number of people come up and they donate, they gift money to the government. They deposit their money in the Pradhan Mantri account. Okay, so they have deposit some amount in the Pradhan Mantri account. So that's called a grant, gifts. Forfeitures. These are in the form of penalties that are imposed by the court for non-compliances with others' contract. Forfeitures you have to pay. Escheat. It refers to the claim of the government on the property of a person who dies without leaving behind any will or any person, and there is no nominee of your property, there is no nominee of your account, then in that case no one is claiming that property, then it will be confiscated by government after giving one notice, and within that notice period someone will come and claim that, then it will be transferred, otherwise it will be escheated. Dividend and profit. Government of India also investing in the projects, different projects in different countries. They will earn dividend, they will earn profit. Profit means the PSUs, public sector undertaking, they are making profit. Then it will be the part of non-tax revenue. Spatial assessment. Suppose you have a farm field and that farm field comes under the developmental authority in that area, then the rate of your farm field will grow, or your property rate will grow due to the developmental activities of government. Then you have to pay the spatial assessment tax to the government. So that's called spatial assessment. So these are the sources of non-tax revenue. Then we have expenditures, revenue expenditures we have. Now what sort of expenditures? We have covered up the receipts, but let's talk about the expenditures. Now the definition part, revenue expenditure refers to the expenditures that neither create any assets nor causes a reduction in any liability of the government. So neither create any assets nor cause a reduction in any liability of the government. For example, payment of salaries, pension, interest, expenditures on administrative sendies, defense services, health services, grants to state, they'll be considered as a revenue expenditure. But this will not reduce any liability or nor create any assets. This is how it works. Revenue expenditure neither create any assets and nor reduce any liability for the nation. It's called revenue expenditures. Then we have a capital budget. Capital budget, it refers to those budget in which liability and assets both are changing as per the requirement of the nation in a year. So both are changing. So it has two components, capital receipts and capital expenditure. So let's talk about individual part. Capital receipts. Capital receipts refers to those receipts which either create liabilities or causes a reduction in the assets of the government. They are non-recurring and non-routine in nature. It's called capital receipts. So the source of capital receipts are borrowing. You will borrow money from open market, from RBI, from international governments, foreign governments, international institutions. You will borrow money, and this borrowing will increase the liability for the government. This will create liability for the government. Recovery of loans. This will reduce the assets. Government grants various loans to the state government or union territories. Recovery of such loans is a capital receipts as it reduces the assets of the government. It will reduce the assets of the government. Other receipts, disinvestment. I'm sure this topic is very much familiar to you because we studied in liberalization, privatization and globalization. 1991, disinvestment. Government of India starts selling their assets, their PSUs to the private organizations, and through that process they will collect some receipts in the form of capital, and that process is called disinvestment. So disinvestment refers to the act of selling part or whole of shares of selected public sectors. Okay. Then we have small savings. Small saving refers to the fund raised from the public in the form of post office deposit, national saving certificates, Kishan Vikas Patra. These are the small savings. They will collect money. So this will create liability for the government. Now let's talk about the capital expenditures. So capital expenditures result in increasing in government assets and reduce in some liabilities. So it's just opposite, creating assets and reducing liability for the nation. What are the sources? First one, loan dispersal. The loan given by the government to the state, PSUs and other government comes under capital expenditure because such loans are assets of the expenditures. Second, loan repayment. The loan that were borrowed in the past but are not now returned back. You have borrowed from foreign economies, international institutions, now you are repaying. And that will reduce the liability, repayment of loans. That will reduce the liability for the nation, is considered to be the capital expenditures. Expenditure resulting in assets creation. The government budgets expenditures on infrastructure, machinery, land, road, bridge. This will create assets for us. Modernization, equipment, modernization of army, that's considered to be the assets creation for the government, for the nation. It's called capital expenditures. Now, the last topic of this chapter, it's budgetary deficit. And budgetary deficit divided into three categories: revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and the primary deficit. Budgetary deficit is the difference between all receipts and expenses in both revenue and capital. It's called budgetary deficit. And this budgetary deficit is divided into three categories: revenue, fiscal, and primary. So let's talk about one of them one by one. Revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is the excess of total revenue, expenditures of the government over its total receipts. Revenue deficit again is the excess of total revenue expenditures of the government over its total receipts. It is related to only revenue expenditures and revenue receipts of the government. So it is calculated with this formula: revenue deficit is equals to total revenue expenditure minus total revenue receipts. So TRE minus TRR. Remedial measures of this revenue deficit. High revenue deficit warn the government either to curtail its expenditures or to increase its taxes or non-tax receipts. These are the remedies of this revenue deficit. The government should raise the rate of taxes, especially on rich people, and any new taxes were imposed. We are supposed to input new taxes, whichever it's possible. Government should try to reduce its expenditure and avoid unnecessary expenditures. This needs to be removed to control the revenue deficit. What are the implications? Implications of revenue deficit: it implies the government is using up savings of other sectors of the economy in finance its expenditures. Second, it also implies that the government has to make up this deficit from the capital receipts through borrowing or reducing the assets. So you are reducing your assets and you are increasing your liabilities. Use capital receipts for meeting the extra consumption expenditures leads to the inflationary situation in the country. Revenue deficits will lead to the inflationary pressure because expenditures are more. So you need to remove that expenses. If you are not controlling the unnecessary expenses from the economy, it will be a difficult situation for us to handle it. Then high revenue deficit gives a warning signal to the government to curtail its expenditures. Reduce expenditures. Government should take serious steps to reduce its expenditures and avoid unproductive, unnecessary expenditures from the country. Second, fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is the excess of total expenditures over total receipts, excluding borrowing. So the formula for fiscal deficit: FD is equals to total expenditure minus total receipts minus capital receipts excluding borrowings. Implications: fiscal deficit indicates the total borrowing requirement of the government. Borrowing not only involved repayment of principal amount but also required payment of interest. This is the first implication. Second, government mainly borrow from the Reserve Bank of India to meet fiscal deficit. Government also borrow from the rest of the world, which raises its dependency on other economies. Borrowing increase the financial burden. So you may be in a situation of debt trap, and your economy will ruled by the other economies because your dependency are more on the other economics. And reason behind, you have borrowed huge amount, huge loan from them. So it will impact the inflation, it will increase the inflation in our country, it will hamper our development, infrastructure development, even the economic growth also will be affected if there is a fiscal deficit in the country. Then the last, but not the least, primary deficit, the excess of fiscal deficit over payment of interest is called primary deficit. So primary deficit is equals to fiscal deficit minus interest payment. There are few implications. Primary deficit shows how much of the government borrow is going to meet the expenses other than the interest payment. A lower primary deficit indicates the interest payment has forced the government to borrow. Thus, it indicates the real position of the government. So that's all, children. We are done with this chapter.